And now we're going to move on to a superstar session. We've got Liftoff talking about their preparation for ATT. Anthony from Liftoff, I think, is going to join us in a second, hopefully any moment now. Anthony, how are you doing?
Fine. Here we go. There we go.
Good stuff.
I'm fine, Austin. How are you?
Pretty good. So very excited to see what you guys are up to. I've found it really hard to keep track, and I do this stuff most of the time. I spent so much of my career, being a front man for an ad company, and I'm still struggling. So obviously, I'm not going to be alone. I can't wait to hear what you've got to say about the preparation for all this stuff. So please go ahead.
Excellent. So I'll just share my screen, and Oscar, if you could give me a thumbs up once you're
all good.
All good on that. You can see preparation for ATT.
I can indeed.
Okay, so yeah, just an introduction. I'm Anthony Lawrence Mkhize. I'm a sales engineer here at Liftoff. Liftoff's a programmatic DSP, I'm sure you guys are aware. And we work with some of the biggest gaming developers, Huge, PlayerX, King. And today I'm going to be talking you through how we've been helping them prepare for ATT. Obviously, that's Apple's app tracking transparency, which is due to come into effect with iOS 14.5, which could drop in any minute now. So without further ado, okay, so we distilled our approach into some operating principles in order to guide us through this big change. The first of these principles was a smooth transition into a post-ATT world. We want to change as little as possible, wherever possible, in terms of setup, performance, and workflows. Obviously, some change was going to be inevitable. We wanted to identify performance risks and then provide some countermeasure to those, and then provide ample heads up and guidance to our clients on these unavoidable changes. Secondly, we wanted to adhere to Apple's privacy guidelines at all times. And thirdly, we would always use an independent third party to measure campaign KPIs. So I think it's certainly worth mentioning at this point what we did not, are not, and certainly would not be doing in preparation for AT&T. We would not try and create a unique identifier in some sort of fancy way that would be an IDFA by proxy. We're not finally parsing Apple's statements to find possible loopholes and ways to interpret things that would let us keep the status quo and circumvent essentially the letter and spirit of ATT. Liftoff was focused on adopting measurement system scan or SK ad network. I'll use the two terms interchangeably for devices on 14.5 and above, and evolving in lockstep with the increasingly privacy conscious world. Right, okay, so this Liftoff performance engine and its three pillars. Essentially at the heart of the engine is a ability to accurately value an ad impression and then show a creative which will convert a user or a potential user. In a post-IDFA world, many of the components from this performance engine, the sections you see here in black, actually remain unaffected. So for example, we've always relied on contextual signals, the technology that drives the ability to value each ad impression does not always rely on per user data. Now, obviously, that being said, there were some modifications that needed to happen. The sections you see in blue here, the way we understood users had to be tweaked. We had to aggregate them, saw them as groups of users now moving forward. We also had to ensure our supply partners were scan ready as well. Now, speaking of supply, this is what that section of the ecosystem looks like for us at this point in time in terms of scan readiness or SK ad network readiness. How many of them have that integrated to allow their inventory to be able to be tracked by SK ad network? Obviously, supply side plays a crucial role in the post-ATT world in terms of tracking. And supply side adoption is lagging. It's not where we would want it. We're seeing, well, it's improving. It's certainly improving at an increasing rate as well. We are seeing 64% as of April the 17th, our scan bought impressions. So those are impressions that are available to be tracked by scan. But I expect this to pick up as we hone in on that release date, which could be any day now, any hour now. So moving on to what the landscape will look like just days after launch of 14.5. So if within 40 days, we expect 65% of iOS impressions to be on 14.5 devices and therefore subject to that AT&T framework. Now, we base this prediction, if we have a look at the chart here, on previous point releases, 0.2, 14.2, 14.3, 14.4, and they follow a similar pattern. The adoption rate starts off slow and steady, and then we see this big uptick, and we expect a similar pattern for 14.5. Now, the environment's going to be fluid, it's going to be turbulent, it's going to be changeable, and later I'll be talking through the measures that Liftoff will be putting in place to smooth out that period. Which, if you remember, was our first operating principle. Okay, so Apple's AT&T framework essentially changes how we're going to be measuring conversions and giving rise for the need for two iOS campaigns, a post-ATT campaign, so for devices running on 14.5 or later, on scan-enabled inventory, we'll use scan or SKAd network for attribution, and pre-ATT campaign, so that would be the existing iOS campaign running on devices on 14.4 or below, and will be measured by the MMP. And I think this slide illustrates it better. Fundamentally, 14.5, or in fact the ATT framework, really is giving us that measurement challenge. So following the launch, there will be 3 different types of inventory, each of which will be characterized by how they are measured. So if we look at the chart here on the left-hand side, the blue section is the world that we live in today. It's the world that I woke up to this morning, where users on 14.4 or below, campaign KPIs measured by the MMP generally, with those real-time granular postbacks we're getting for pre and post-install reporting. Now, the green section, the green and yellow section, but we'll park the yellow section for a second. The emergence of those are the release of 14.5, and if you look at the date that's the date we were expecting it. So so yeah, it's been a while. So that appears, these sections appear once once iOS 14.5 is out and users are upgrading from 14.4 into 14.5, and therefore campaigns will be measured by scan in that green section. Now, that yellow section at the bottom there is, those are 14.5 users as well, but they are actually in-app, source apps, where the publisher app hasn't done the required work in order to allow their inventory to be able to be tracked by scan, which still might be an issue, as we saw the lagging scan adoption on the supply side before. So we're in a bit of a quandary with this, because the users upgraded onto 14.5 more than likely hasn't opted into sharing their IDFA, and we can't probabilistically or fingerprint match them. We know that's a big no-no. So they can't be attributed by the MMP, and they can't be attributed by scan because the publisher app hasn't done the required work to allow their inventory to be able to be tracked by scan. So they fall into this non-measurable pool of inventory. Now, how long this pool of inventory lasts, how deep or wide it is completely dependent on supply side adoption of that scan integration, which, like I said, we expect to increase as we hone in on the release date. Okay, so how to manage the transition. So to make sure our customers were set up for success, I'm going to run through our approach and recommendations in these 3 areas: the bidding strategy, the budget allocation between those 2 campaigns, that pre-ATT campaign used on 14.4 or below, measured by the MMP, and the post-ATT campaign used on 14.5 and moving forward and above, measured by scan. And then finally, advising on campaign setup changes and goal definition. Okay, so bidding strategy ML approach. Let's, here we see a depiction of the feedback loop ML has to train and adjust its bidding decisions and optimizations, and therefore drive better performance. The first measurement challenge we have here is that pool of supply that we are the non-measurable pool, the pool there will be no learned data for ML. So we're not going to be learning anything from that section of supply. So we have incomplete data essentially. That's major challenge number one. Number two, the second problem is that we fully expect tracking breakages and instability, especially during the transitional period at the beginning. Why do we expect this? Well, this is the first time Apple is rolling this out at scale. So every entity in the ecosystem, whether it be a source app, whether it be an exchange, whether it be a DSP, whether it be an MMP, whether it be an advertiser, has to do work to get ready for scan attribution. Now, all of their efforts have to go correctly in order for attribution to work. This is the first time source apps have been tasked with the responsibility of ensuring that tracking tags are going to be working properly in order for advertisers to be able to track conversions. So we think things might go wrong here. I mean, things have been going wrong. We've been dealing with some measurement challenges, some bad setups impacting scan reporting, and also just straight up breakages, really. Bugs on the Apple side. What's the correct adjective? Incomplete, misleading implementation, documentation, which has led to some problems with scan reporting. So it's important that when bidding strategy and ML is so tightly coupled with measurement, that if breakages occur, those breakages are going to feed back in bad data and drag ML away from performing well. And we certainly don't want that. So what's our plan when it comes to those two measurement challenges I previously mentioned? We have a strategy that involves freezing ML, and we believe that this has a number of advantages. Initially, it will help weather the storm and protect from those measurement challenges, the breakages, the incomplete data, learning off of bad data. We'll keep campaign ML models frozen in their most up-to-date state, locking in that buying strategy. And in the background, we'll be collecting scan events and training scan taught ML in the background whilst running on that frozen ML. So by employing this strategy, we believe we're going to get better out of the gate performance. We've got that optimal buying strategy locked in. We'll have robustness or protection from those tracking breakages. And a big one here, I think, is we'll be able to provide more time, to really decide on the optimal campaign setup for that post-ATT campaign, which will be attributed by scan. We will be accumulating those scan postbacks and events, which will be training the models in the background, and we'll be able to maximize the amount of time supply has in order to integrate SK ad network or scan on their inventory to shrink that non-measurable pool of inventory, tackling that incomplete data problem that I mentioned before. So this strategy of freezing ML would only be in play during that transitional period when the scan only models we've been training in the background start predicting better than the frozen models we have implemented on campaigns. We'll start slowly shifting spend towards those scan only taught ML models. So how long do we think that we can run on those frozen models? We've actually been successfully doing this for over 3 months for a privacy inclined customer of ours. So we expect we'll be able to run performance between 3 to 5 months on those frozen ML. Okay, budget allocation. So to maintain optimal performance, budgets are going to have to be dynamically distributed across those two inventory types. So pre and post ATT campaigns are going to run concurrently. And obviously target mutually exclusive inventory. So whether a user's on 14.4 or below or 14.5, supply availability is going to rapidly change, potentially by the hour, especially in that initial period post-launch. So the pre-ATT campaign used on 14.4, supply will dwindle as users upgrade and move into 14.5, and we don't want to overspend on that shrinking supply. And then the post-ATT supply is going to rapidly grow, and we don't want to hold back a campaign with a static budget on that. So to avoid degrading performance, budgets are going to have to be dynamically adjusted between pre and post. So this brings up our auto ramp feature that we've developed, which is essentially automatic budget allocation between those two campaigns. So obviously an overall budget for both will be set, and then our algorithms will take the guesswork out of how to split between pre and post. The auto ramp feature here is going to be more responsive to large, well, inventory changes in general than any sort of manual analysis that a human being could ever really do, especially in that initial really dynamic period post-launch. So campaign setup and goal definitions. For our post-ATT campaign, we're going to have to pick the right event to optimize towards for scan. To maximize performance, we have been suggesting we select an event that occurs frequently after install, an upper funnel event, ideally within that first day after install. This is going to maximize the volume and freshness of data for training that ML, allowing it to make better bidding decisions. It's especially important because of the 24-hour timer mechanics of the scan attribution. So when it comes to the right optimization event to pick, if you have a campaign currently live with Liftoff, we can conduct some frequency capture analysis of those events to advise which one would be most optimal to pick. We can also, well, we also suggest you work with your MMP to define these events as well. We're going to support CPI and CPI optimization for those scan taught ML models. And the sooner we have those scan events coming back and a event pick to optimize towards, the sooner we can start training those scan taught models in the background. Right, there are lots of words on this slide, but the broad brushstrokes of it are this. On the left-hand side, we see the risks involved with the changes ahead, the implications of those risks in the middle, and then our countermeasures that we Liftoff has put in place. So just to broadly go over it, the lagging supply adoption will have a negative impact on post-ATT supply. We've been raising awareness in the industry about what's at stake in solutions, and working directly with exchanges and our top source app to ensure scan compliance. So hawking back to those tracking breakages and the integration issues of sparse data for ML, the response for this, if you remember, was to freeze our most performing ML and those models, locking in that optimal buying strategy and safeguards against the data pollution. And it also buys time for scan setup and optimization. And finally, complicated setup for scan events, which will negatively impact measurability and performance. We are going to analyze the capture rate of the events that you have coming back currently, and then suggest which one would be the most optimal under scan attribution mechanics to optimize towards, and provide a step-by-step checklist in order to maximize scan readiness when it comes about, which could be any day, any hour now. Okay, I think, yep, that is it. I'd like to throw back to Oscar there. Oh.
Great stuff. I seem to have missed the mute button when I pressed it. So we have a whole bunch of questions for you, as I'm sure you understand. But I mean, for me, what I think is clear anyway is just we even though we know it's coming, even though we know it's, well, presumably any minute now I'll say something about it, probably. We still have a lot of uncertainty, and it sounds like there's going to be a lot of transitional stages that, you know, as a developer, as a publisher of games, we're going to have to kind of rely on you guys, on the kind of platform providers, DSPs and so on and so forth, to be able to help advise us and help us understand what the best, you know, way forward is. You know, is it as simple as that? I mean, do we just have to wait and trust the platforms, or is there anything else that we should be doing?
Yeah, well, I mean, it is a waiting game, certainly. There are some due diligence that we can put in place now. We can make sure that we have scan integrated, ideally. Now we can make sure we're receiving those scan postbacks and we're forwarding them on correctly to your MMP, and you're seeing what we're seeing. We can also pick an event to, as I mentioned in the presentation, we can pick an event to optimize towards now, and we can start training our scan-only models as well, so we don't start from a standing start. So I mean, those are the big things here. Let's get scan integration working, postbacks coming through, and check that all of the pipes are plugged correctly. So we're not caught off guard and we're not doing this after it's already launched.
Yeah, I think that's really important, isn't it? Do what you can. I think it's going to be particularly impactful on people who've already got momentum. A lot of the studios we work with are just trying to work out how they're going to test the basic stuff, let alone, is their game of interest at all, let alone how they optimize. It feels to me like a lot of the really difficult stuff is working out how we're going to do it. If you're used to being able to really target efficiently, to know, retargeting works well, how you've got your audience, behaviors and your segments and your ROAS. That's the part that's the difficult bit for me. I mean, I think for a lot of developers, is that fair?
No, I think you're completely right. I think there's going to be a lot of testing and trial and error, because that's going to be inevitable, especially when it comes to conversion value modeling. I think you might also see certain conversion value models arising in certain verticals. So travel might set up conversion values in a certain way. Gaming might do it in a certain way. So that's going to be interesting to monitor as well.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to see how you can learn from how other sort of app types function in this way. I mean, I think particularly around rewarded video would be interesting. Anyway, enough of me tasking stuff. We have some questions for you. So, do you help in UA only, or can a developer monetize through Liftoff as well? And can we get Liftoff demand through Fiverr or some other mediation?
Yeah, Liftoff's connected with all of the major exchanges. Sorry, I missed that first bit. Was the first bit?
Oh, it was. Do you help in UA only, so user acquisition only,
no.
or do you focus on monetization, or both?
So Liftoff runs UA campaigns certainly, and re-engagement campaigns, generally focusing on driving users to down funnel events. So yes, certainly.
Cool. So the next one was, what is your main source of inventory? And can you explain your DSP user journey?
Main source, well, as I mentioned before, we are connected across all of the major exchanges. So all types of inventory. There's not an inventory source where that we would not be able to offer, certainly. So whatever it might be, video, banners, interstitials, native, whatever it is, certainly we can provide.
Another question we've got is, what is ML? Now, I'm pretty sure it's machine learning. I think they're pretty sure it's machine learning.
Acronyms,
but just to make sure,
in this industry, I should have made that clear. Yes, machine learning.
I mean, like I say, I've been doing this stuff for so long, and I've learned acronyms this last few weeks. It's like, the number of acronyms seems to be exploding as we get more and more. I think there's a sort of factor between a level of uncertainty and the number of new acronyms we invent.
Yeah.
Is that fair? I don't know if that's fair.
Yeah, I think it is. They're tightly coupled.
But it's easy, isn't it? It's when we're trying to deal with rapid changing environments. I think it's understandable. We grasp shorthand as quickly and easily as possible. I think historically in monetization we use the term whale a lot, which I'm trying to sort of avoid using. But I can see why we end up doing it. Anyway, next, Apple haven't mentioned IDFA in the event yet. I don't know if it's over yet or not. Somebody might tell me. So
I believe they started on the hour, didn't they? Is it 7 p.m. time, or have they been going for since?
Well, I've got Tech Radar in the background running live.
I think it was actually 6 p.m. So they've been going for an hour and a quarter. Yeah. So okay, that's interesting.
So
I really thought it was today.
I can see elements talking about air tags apparently.
So Jez has just confirmed that. Oh no,
it's over. No mention. Well, thank you, Jez. But that's interesting. I mean, I'm not an Apple user, but of course, it's such an important part of our industry.
Yeah.
It's very. I mean, what do you make of that fact that they haven't commented on it?
I mean, I've been going through the ringer with this. As you could have seen in one of our slides earlier, we've been prepping for this since the beginning of March. And I really, if we could just get a date, it would make everything a lot easier to plan for. It's the not knowing. Could it be this week? Could it be next week? Everyone's kept on their toes. It's not, I mean, they're the biggest technology company in the world, so my chagrin is probably not even going to be a blip on their radar, but it's annoying. Yeah, I find it strange that they haven't mentioned it, because it is going to be an absolutely monumental change. So yeah, not this, maybe next one.
But at the end of the day, I think what we are seeing in whatever you think about Apple's decision or not, the reality is that we are seeing a ground shift in terms of the interest in privacy. And I think there's also we've been doing some work recently with the ICO, so that's the privacy group in the UK recently, about how to incorporate particularly child-related privacy in game design. And it's fascinating kind of looking at that piece, just how important it's now become in terms of a kind of cause. And I think one of the biggest risks I think we have is as an industry is, and I keep going back to the cookie thing. I think that the way that cookies operated, that's making people less safe. I think that's a travesty. I don't want to see privacy becoming something which causes people to be less safe and less able to protect their needs. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's a concern that organizations like Apple have, and they want to make sure they do the right thing.
Yeah.
But it feels to me like they've already said what they're doing to a large extent. Do you think there's anything that's yet to come that we haven't yet understood, or do you think we're just waiting for them to pull the plug?
Is there something yet to come? There was a period in time where I was learning more and more about how the mechanics of attribution, especially around ATT scan, was working. And the delivering of the message from Apple has not been clear and helpful, in my opinion. So around the privacy thresholds, when it comes to conversion values in the postbacks, we'd love some more information on exactly how that's going to work. Same thing with the source app. All of these things, just an explanation of how they work, even if they're not going to change how they work, would be absolutely fantastic. So we can work upon the rules which are being inflicted, might be a tad harsh, but at least enforced.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. There's a note here which I think has come from Jez as well on the chat, that apparently AirTag requires iOS 14.5, and AirTag is launching on April the 30th. So does that mean they've kind of secretly launched it? Announced it as next. Anyway, whatever. I just think it's fascinating. We're in incredibly fascinating times. At the same month that we're losing IDFA, we're seeing Steam giving us some level of attribution for PC games, which is I think a phenomenally positive thing. But again, privacy will be important there as well. One last softball question before I invite Jaco to come on. Softball question for you: what is the difference between a DSP and an ad network?
A DSP buys from exchanges. An ad network will have a network of publisher properties underneath them. So Liftoff is programmatic DSP, buying from all of the major ad exchanges, the Fibers, the Googles of this world. An ad network would be an app plugin, I believe.
Yeah, I always forget, and I always make the mistake between demand and supply side, because my head as a game maker, it's the wrong way around. But I've spent so much time, I should know by now. But anyway, Anthony, thank you so much for that. Really fascinating stuff. I think we're in amazingly interesting times, and I really appreciate you doing that. We'll sort out the Amazon voucher stuff later for the question givers as well. So thank you very much.